Okay, get started. Okay, I have a warm-up video today. Scroll up. Oh, yeah. I'm worried that that's going to screw it up. It's done that in the past. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah, they did a good job hamming it up. But all right, so that's what we're going to see today, basically, the Turing machine. So all right, so a few administrative things. So sorry for those of you who came late that you missed the video. I'll send a link to it. But so PSET 1 is due tomorrow. PSET 2 will be out soon. I apologize that you'll just have a little less than 2 weeks for PSET 2, but we're just a little bit crunched because of the snow closure. So so last time Robin gave a guest lecture, and as I mentioned in email, Robin will be giving a few more lectures. He's but he told you about context-free languages, okay, which are like which were sort of our final way station on the way to computational universality. Okay, so what is a context-free language? Well, it's a set of strings that can be generated by a context-free grammar, right? What's a context-free grammar? Well, it's a collection of production rules, we call them, that where you start with some initial symbol, and then you can you have a bunch of replacements that you're allowed to make as many times as you want. So whenever you see an A, you can replace it by AC. Wherever you see a C, So you could replace it by nothing, and so forth. Okay, and then we look at the set of all the finite strings that you could generate by applying these rules a finite number of times, and that's that's what we mean by a context-free language. Okay, and so what you saw last week was that context-free grammars can express certain concepts that provably cannot be expressed by any regular expression, right? Or that there are context-free languages that are provably not regular languages. Okay, and standard example is that language there, right? Well, basically anything where you need sort of the same amount of something on either side, right? Like an equal number of A's as B's, right? This will be context-free because you can just have some production rules that just throw out like an A on the left and a B on the right, and keep doing that as many times as you want. Right, you're until you stop, you're allowed to do that. Okay, but we also proved using, the pigeonhole principle or using the pumping lemma that this language L here is not regular. Right, so context-free languages are more powerful, right? Because Robin also showed you that every regular language is also a context-free one, right? So context-free can simulate regular, but not vice versa, not in general. Okay. On the other hand, there are also examples of languages that are not context-free either. Anyone remember an example of that? What's an example of a non-context-free language? Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. That was intentional. No, it wasn't. Okay. So, okay. Yeah. So, so we can just add one little thing, like a third symbol, and then this language is provably not context-free. So there's a pumping lemma for context-free languages, by which you can prove that this sort of thing is not context-free. So I'm not. I think that Robin did not get to that last week. Is that? Oh, excellent, excellent. Okay, great. So you covered this in recitation. So already, context-free languages, already, run into some limitations pretty quickly, right? Because you would think that this is a pretty simple language. Although I don't know of any human language that has anything like this in it, right? Where you have to have equal numbers of three things in it. Whereas there are certainly human languages that have constructions like this, right? Where you have to balance your parentheses, or for every what's a good example of this? Yeah, so you create, when you're speaking in an English sentence, you create subordinate clauses, and then however many clauses you create, you have to close up each one at the end. All right, so you can say really, really complicated sentences where indeed you tax the listener's memory, right? Because because the listener has to remember sort of all the parentheses that you opened up in your sentence in order to know, in order to remember that you're closing all of them, as I did just now, right? So context-free languages can express concepts that do require, a lot of memory if you're a human being trying to listen to it. But that's, but context-free languages are a pretty good model for most human languages, right? For English, for things like that. Also for programming languages. Right, and if you take a compiler's course, right, it's all about how do you parse a context-free language, right? How do you take a string that belongs to a context-free language, and how do you work backwards to find the sequence of production rules that gave rise to that string? Okay, and and in fact, you could have context-free languages that that are not uniquely parsed, right? Where the same sentence could have been could have multiple valid grammatical interpretations. Okay, so we all know examples of that. Okay, so last week you also saw push-down automata, which are the sort of you could basically say in an analogy. Regular languages are to finite automata as context-free languages are to push-down automata. Okay, so push-down automata are like the machines whose power is to recognize a context-free language. Okay, and a push-down automaton, as you saw last week, is basically just a finite automaton. So it reads its input from left to right, but it also has a stack, right? It also has the ability to take symbols and push them onto a stack, and then pop them off of the stack, and then only accept, say, if it finds the right things from the stack. Okay, and that allows it to recognize languages like this one, right? Because you can, as you read A's, you can push A's onto your stack, and then you can pop them off as you read the B's and only accept if the right number of A's come out that match the number of B's. Okay, so a stack is an unbounded memory, but it's an unbounded memory of a very, very limited kind, because you can only read the topmost symbol off of it. Okay, so okay, but there's also an important difference between the two cases, which is that we saw that there's deterministic and there's non-deterministic finite automata, and they recognize exactly the same set of languages, whereas that's not the case with push-down automata. So in general, to recognize a context-free language, we need a non-deterministic push-down automaton, right? And that's in general more powerful than a deterministic push-down automaton. Okay, there are languages that can be recognized by that are context-free, or equivalently can be recognized by an NPDA, but that cannot be recognized by a deterministic push-down automaton. Okay, and this will, well, it'll probably be on PSET 2 somewhere. Okay, but the equivalence, the fact that every context-free language can be recognized by some NPDA, by some non-deterministic push-down automaton, and conversely, that for every non-deterministic push-down automaton, there is a context-free language that does, or the language that it accepts is a context-free language. Say, right? These are two more theorems that that one has to prove. I'm not going to do the proofs in class because they're kind of boring. They're if you understood the proofs that regular expressions are equivalent to NDFAs, to non-deterministic finite automata, it's very, very similar to that, except that you sort of have to add in the the push-down capability. So you can you won't need to know the proofs for this class if you're curious about them. They're in the Sipser book. Okay. All right, so that's mostly what I wanted to say about that. But now we might wonder, given that context-free languages are still so limited, that they can't even recognize this A to the N, B to the N, C to the N language. Okay, so let's now just define a more powerful model of computation, let's say, that can recognize this language, right? And now comes sort of the interesting part. Okay, because a priori, you might have imagined that we're just going to need an infinite sequence of more and more powerful models of computation, right? In which case, this could be a really long course. Okay, like imagine like this week, I would give you a model that can recognize this language, but that won't be able to recognize the language A to the N, B to the N, C to the N, D to the N, right? And then next week we'll have to do that, but then a language that doesn't have the capability for recognizing A to the N, B to the N, C to the N, D to the N, E to the N, okay, and so forth, right? This could get really boring really fast, okay. But fortunately, that's not how it works. So the amazing discovery, I guess in the in the 1930s or so that we sort of take for granted today, but was not not obvious at the time that this was going to be true, is that once you add in enough capability to your computer, you get past the threshold. Okay, and this we call the threshold of universality. Okay, and then you at some point you become able to do anything that you can do with sort of any physically reasonable computing device that anyone has ever been able to think of. Okay, and you just have a single device that sort of captures all of it. Okay, and that's of course what we now call the computer. Okay, so. Look, I mean, it's very easy to sort of forget, that this sort of didn't have to be true. I mean, when I first, learned what programming was, when I was an adolescent, right? The first thing that I wanted to do was, okay, well then, okay, that's great that you can use BASIC or whatever to make games, but what about making a more powerful programming language, right? I mean, BASIC just has these few commands, right? Well, if you wanted to make even better games, then probably, you would need a better programming language that would let you do things that could never be done in BASIC, right? And you could imagine, an infinite sequence of more and more powerful programming languages, except, how would you create the programming languages, right? There seems like there's an infinite regress. So that sort of confused me, and and it was sort of mind-blowing to find out that no, actually, anything you can do with any programming language can, in principle, already be done with this, stupid, Apple BASIC at the time that I saw, or GW BASIC. I don't know if any of you have ever seen these or still remember what they are. Okay, but they can in principle they can do everything, except that they can only address a tiny amount of memory. But that's a technical issue. Okay, so all right, so let's come to the early 1930s, I guess. So Alan Turing is 22, he's the same age as you, basically. He is an undergraduate at King's College in Cambridge, and he was thinking about several things. One is that he wanted to make a really big contribution to math. He was very impressed. But he had a friend named David Champernowne who had solved an open problem in a very, very simple way. I don't know if any of you know what it is. So does anyone know what a normal number is? Okay. Oh, this is a neat story. So a normal number is let's say a number where when you write it out in decimal, then every sequence of every finite sequence of digits, occurs in the limit with the same frequency that it would occur with if we just generated digits at random. Okay, so all right. here's pi, right? It is, very, very widely conjectured that pi is a normal number, okay? Which would mean that, there's, first of all, it would mean that as you go out further and further, there's about 10% zeros, 10% ones, 10% twos, and so forth. And it would further mean that, if you looked at two-digit sequences, right, there's like 1% of each one, in the limit as you go out further, right? And that every possible sequence of 3 digits, 3 consecutive digits occurs, 1/1000th of the time, and so forth, right? That's one of these things where it's like how could it not be true, right? No one has proved that pi satisfies this property. Okay. In fact, here's a mind-blowing fact. Okay, for all that anyone can prove today, after some finite point, the decimal expansion of pi just consists of zeros and ones. Okay, that's that sounds completely stupid, right? And it is in some sense, right? But no one has a proof that would rule that out. Okay, So actually, maybe 50 years ago or something, John Nash was a math professor here. Any of you saw the movie? Yeah, and so all right. So here's a story that's not in the movie. He apparently he gave a midterm exam here where in an analysis class it had 4 questions, each for 25% of the grade, and one of the questions was prove that pi is a normal number. And and he said his thinking was that there must be some undergrad here who's not going to realize that this is a famous open problem, so they won't have the mental block that everyone else has, and they'll just come up with a proof. As it happened, none of them did. But so this problem remains open. But if any of you want to solve it, I'll instant A+. Okay, but all right, so there was a problem. Can you find just an explicit number which is normal? I mean, it's not hard to see that if you just generated a number at random, that in some sense it has probability 1 of being a normal number, right? Like a random number will be normal. But can you give an explicit example of a transcendental number which you can prove is normal? Okay, so this was a question that was, this is one example of the sort of question that was floating around Cambridge, the other Cambridge at that time. So does anyone know an example of such a number? All right. So I can show you what Alan Turing's friend came up with. All right, it's a forehead slapper, when you say it. Here's what he said. Here's my number, right? And this is now called Champernowne's number. We'll just take 0.0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay, and then you can verify, which is a pretty easy exercise, that this is indeed a normal number. Okay, so Turing was kind of like I need to do something this important, and so I think it's fair to say that he did. So okay, and then. The other thing is, if you've seen the recent movie about him, then you know this. Turing had a friend in high school, Christopher Morcom, who died of tuberculosis, and Turing was very incredibly depressed about this, and was ruminating about what is a mind. Is there any sense in which Morcom's mind could be said to survive death, or could a mind be simulated by a machine? Okay, he was worried about kinds of things like that, and then there was there was something called Hilbert's and Scheiding's problem, which was so David Hilbert, who was one of I guess the greatest mathematicians of the time or of all time, gave a famous speech in the year 1900 where he listed 23 great math problems for the next century, and they were hugely influential. Most of the problems have since been solved, or at least the well-defined ones have. One of them that hasn't been is the Riemann hypothesis. And we may talk about a couple other of Hilbert's problems in this course, okay? Because some of them are directly relevant to the course. But his first problem was maybe the most audacious of all of them, okay? And his first problem was like the meta-mathematical question, you could say, which is just just give a mechanical procedure for just deciding the truth or falsehood of any mathematical statement. Okay, so that's kind of the problem that if you solve it, you sort of you never have to solve any other math problem again, right? Just describe how you would build a machine where you just feed in some slips of paper that encode that you want to know whether the Riemann hypothesis is true, and then you turn the crank a little bit, and then out would come yes, the Riemann hypothesis is true, right? And the machine would always be correct. Okay, so that was Hilbert's modest request, and it was not he sort of he believed that there ought to be such a machine, and that would be like the completion of mathematics. Okay, but but then in order to answer his question, you first had to answer a more basic one, which is what exactly do we mean by a machine, right? What do we mean by a mechanical procedure? Okay, so. So in 1931, Gödel already, made a major advance on this sort of question. We're going to circle back later to what Gödel did, okay? But Turing was certainly well aware of what of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which was very new at that time, But the incompleteness theorem still didn't answer this question of, could there be a machine that just sorts all the mathematical statements into the true or false ones, or the provable or disprovable or neither provable nor disprovable or whatever. Okay, so someone calling us? Okay, all right, so. So the first thing that Turing had to do is come up with a notion of what we mean in general by a computing machine. Okay, and you can read, so I have a link from the Stellar site to Turing's paper from 1936, which is actually very well worth looking at. I mean, not that the technical parts of it are kind of boring and obsolete anyway, but the conceptual parts of the paper, and especially I think section 9 of the paper, where he sort of explains the intuition for how he came up with the Turing machine. Basically, it's really very well worth reading. So here's there's a couple of ways that we can approach this. So the first one, a little bit ahistorical, is to just start with the finite automata that we've already seen, and ask, what is it that we should add to them, if we want to make them more powerful. Okay, so we've seen, a finite automaton is basically just a machine with some finite number of internal states, that starts at the left end of its input, and then it reads the input from left to right. okay? And each time it reads an input symbol, it can transition to a new state depending on its current state and depending on what symbol it's reading. And then at the end, it can either accept or reject. Okay, so now what is it that we should add to a finite automaton? What is a finite automaton missing that a full computer ought to have? Memory? Yeah, well, okay, you could say in some sense, there is a memory. There's this thing up here, right? But what's the problem with it? Yeah, well, it's right. Well, the finite automaton, it has this, memory down here, which is like a, like a read-write memory, but which is finite, right? Which is bounded. Yeah.
You can't really. A finite automaton doesn't have anything you can write to.
Yeah, exactly. It has no unbounded writable memory. Right, that's the first issue, right? So, it has an unbounded sort of read-only memory, this thing up here, right? And it's got a bounded read-write memory, yeah?
You also can only move in one direction.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so we could say that, you're allowed to be writing symbols as you move from left to right, but that's pretty weak also, right? Because, if you're just writing symbols, but, you can never go back and revisit the stuff that you've written, right? Well, actually, that sort of thing does have a name. It's called a finite state transducer. Okay, it's something that just is allowed to spit out symbols as it's going from left to right, but then it can never reread the symbols that it's written. So it's like like from its perspective, what's the point of writing them? You never get to see them again. Okay, so we better allow it to read the to reread the things it's written. Okay, now you could say you get to go from left as well as right, but you are only but you're still not allowed to write symbols, right? So you can you can define something called a two-way finite automaton. Okay, you can define, if you like, a finite automaton that's allowed to move left and right, but that's still, only allowed to read symbols and not allowed to write symbols. Okay, now there's an interesting theorem which maybe I'll give it as extra credit on PSET 2 if anyone wants to think about it. It turns out that even a two-way finite automaton can still recognize only the regular languages. Okay, so even if you can go to the left as well as to the right, if you only have the ability to read, then that doesn't really help you. Doesn't let you recognize any more languages. Okay, fine, but let's say that. You can go both ways on the tape. So you're allowed to move left, you're allowed to move right, you're allowed to read, and you're allowed to write. Okay? And furthermore, we'll say that you're not even just limited to the memory that's you're not like if your string is n bits long, your input string, say is a string of n bits. You're not even just limited to those n bits. Okay, you're allowed to have scratch space. Okay, by the way, we'll have the same policy for the midterm. You can have as much blank paper as you want. Okay. So you're allowed to go sort of off to the side if you want. Okay, and a standard way that we could model this is to say you have a special symbol that marks the beginning or the end of the input. Okay, we'll often just write that as a pound sign. Okay, and then off to the sides, let's say to both sides if you like, there's there's just an unbounded number of zero squares, right? And you're allowed to use these as scratch space. Okay, so Okay, then there's one other thing that we have to take care of with defining a Turing machine. Okay, which is you could like with these rules that I've talked about, where you can go left and you can go right. What could you could accept or you could reject, but what else could happen? Yeah, you can produce a new string, right? But yeah.
You could not stop.
Yeah, it's very possible that your machine will just run forever and will never halt, right? For example, if we said, here's your initial state, Q0. Now, regardless of what happens, I want you to write a 0. Okay, so here's let me show you what a Turing machine looks like. Okay, it looks like a finite automaton, except we can add some additional abilities. Okay, like we can say if you are reading a 0. Okay, so I'm going to label an arrow by these notations that says if you are reading a 0, then I want you to write a 0 and go to the right. Okay, move 1 square to the right. Okay. And now, transition to this state. That's what the arrow means. Okay? I can say, if you're reading a 1, then, replace it by a 0. Overwrite it with a 0. Okay? So you can overwrite symbols that are on the tape by new symbols and go to the right. Okay? And transition to this state. Okay, and then in this state, I can say, if you're reading a 0, then overwrite it with a 1 and go to the left. And if you are reading a 1, then leave it a 1 and go to the left. Okay, so what's this machine going to do, anyone? Yeah, it's just going to keep going left and right forever, and it'll just whatever 2 squares you started on, it'll overwrite whatever was on those squares by 0, 1, and then it'll just keep looping forever with keeping them 0, 1. Okay, so this Turing machine here will never halt. Okay, or sometimes I'll just say it loops. Okay, although a Turing machine if I say a Turing machine loops, I don't necessarily mean that it's it loops through the same finite number of states forever. So for example, what's a Turing machine that runs forever but that's never in the same configuration twice? How about
A machine that keeps going right.
Yeah, exactly. You just have one that just keeps going to the right. If you read a 0, then write a 1 and go to the right. If you read a 1, then write a 1 and go to the right. Okay, imagine, I start this off at some position. It's just going to keep writing 1s, going to the right forever. Okay? Okay, but unfortunately, it's going to be very, very hard to avoid this problem. Some of you know this when you're programming. Yes, your program can get into an infinite loop. Okay, it would be great if we could detect when that's going to happen. But we'll come back to that point later. Okay, but in any case, while a Turing machine can run forever, it can also stop. Okay, so with finite automata, right, it was very, very easy to, and also with pushdown automata, right, it was very, very easy to sort of define the stopping condition because it stops just whenever it reaches the right end of the string, right? It's just, and at that point it has to either accept or reject. Okay, with a Turing machine, a Turing machine can be moving all over the place. It can be going left, going right. And so we have to say explicitly, when it's time for the machine to stop. So, so we can say, so all I'll do is, I'll just have special arrows that say accept or reject. Okay, so I can say if you're in this state and you're reading a 1, then halt and accept. Okay, or I can say if you're in this state and you're reading a 0, then halt and reject. Okay, so you're allowed to do things like that. All right, so now I'm not going to write out like a formal definition in terms of tuples, okay? But this is what a Turing machine is, okay? It's a finite automaton, where the transitions between states are labeled by a symbol that you're reading from the tape, okay? What symbol should then be written on that square of the tape? Which direction you should move in on the tape, left or right, okay? Or this can be just accept or reject. Okay, is that clear? So okay, so how did Turing sort of come to this definition? Well, he was thinking about computers, which does anyone know what the word computer meant at that time? It meant, yeah.
People who did calculations.
Exactly, it meant a person. Right, so like when you read his paper, he's talking about computers. He means people who, were generally like these just rooms full of women at the time who were hired to just do to carry out computations. And he was thinking about can we formalize, what they're doing, when they're computing, right? What it means to carry out, as just a specific sequence of instructions, and so basically, what he, the way that he thought about it was that, a human being who's doing a computation has of course, being human, we all have only a finite amount of memory, right? Hence the finite state machine. Okay, but, we can have lots and lots of scratch paper available to us, right? And, and a Turing machine is often sort of described as, an infinite paper tape. Okay, but, it doesn't have to be actually infinite. Right? In fact, after any finite amount of time, you will only ever have used a finite amount of the tape. Right? Why is that? Anyone? Well, because it's because at each time step, you can only visit one more tape square than you visited before, right? So after t time steps, you can only have seen t squares of the tape. Okay, so really all the infiniteness means, is that there's as much tape as you want. There's as much scratch paper available to you as you're going to need, which, we can question that assumption later, and we will when we come to complexity theory. Okay, but for now, we'll just assume that you've got as much scratch paper, you have as much memory available as you might need, which is sort of the simplest assumption. Okay, and then And then Turing says, basically, what is a piece of paper, right? Well, it's this big two-dimensional surface, on which you could write symbols, like stuff like this, right? But then, he says, first of all, and this is something that's sort of it was maybe obvious to us today. It was obvious to him at the time, but this required argument. He says, first of all, we can discretize things, right? We can assume that this paper is actually graph paper, okay? And that there's exactly one symbol written in each square, right? And why is it okay to assume that? Well, like if you're just drawing on a piece of paper, right? There's a whole continuum of different things you can draw, But you can't actually make out a whole continuum of different things that are drawn when you stare at the paper, right? There are only there's only a finite number of alphabet symbols that you're going to be able to distinguish by looking at a piece of paper, right? And the proof of that is it's the pigeonhole principle. Okay, that if we had an infinite number of symbols, then there would have to be two symbols that would be arbitrarily close to each other, right? And I mean, already with the finite number of symbols that we have, right, it can be very easy to confuse an I for a 1, or lowercase l for a 1 or whatever, right? We already get the way that I draw, A's. Sometimes people may think that they're O's. Okay, so people already get confused, right? And so we can't really hope to discriminate more than a finite number of symbols, So he says. So let's and if we have only a finite number of symbols, right, we can imagine that each one is written on some particular square on a tape. On a piece of paper. Okay, then he says that the two-dimensional character of paper is clearly not essential. So we can just simplify things by imagining that it's one-dimensional. That's actually a claim that requires proof, and in fact, one can go back later and justify that claim. How would one justify such a claim? Anyway. Yeah, basically, the way that, you justify one of these things is that you would have to prove that, okay, anything that you can do with a two-dimensional Turing machine, you can also do with a one-dimensional Turing machine, right? That the one can simulate the other. Okay, and one can indeed prove that. We'll maybe, later in this lecture, we'll sketch some examples of how these sorts of simulations go. Okay, but he says for simplicity, so let's just imagine a one-dimensional, an unbounded one-dimensional tape on which symbols are written. And then, we imagine the human being, the computer, who's looking at, and then, he says, well, look, a human being can only look at a finite number of symbols at a time, right? It's not like we can encompass everything, right? Your eye is focused on one particular thing. Okay, and in fact, we might as well just simplify things further and assume that you're only looking at one symbol at a time, right? You've got, and once again, one can say, if you're allowed to look at a finite, at 10 symbols at a time, that's not going to change what you can do, right? That's again a claim that has to be justified with a proof. Okay, but and then you're allowed to overwrite symbols, and then you can move around. Okay, but he didn't want to assume the ability to just jump anywhere. Okay, because how exactly do you do that, right? I mean, let's say that how would you instantaneously jump to some part of the paper tape that was 10 miles away? All right, so he says, okay, so you can move along, one square at a time. That assumption actually, would get relaxed later, right? Today, our computer memories are not generally organized like this. They're organized as what we call random access memories, or RAMs, okay, which do allow you to jump around, right? But as you get to, as some of you may know, if you've studied architecture, that as you try to have a bigger and bigger memory on your computer, you face the problem of memory latency, right? The fact that the speed of light is finite eventually does come and bite you, right? And it takes time to reach the faraway parts of your memory. Okay, so with the Turing machine, we sort of don't have to worry about that issue because we've already assumed that you're only allowed to move at at some constant speed, left and right on the tape. Okay, so that's sort of how Turing came up with this notion. So let's do one example of a Turing machine, all right? And I think we're just going to do one, okay? Because it can get it's like programming in assembly language, except far more painful, okay? So I'm not going to force you to do lots and lots of Turing machines. I'm not a sadist, okay? But just to fix ideas, let's do one of them. All right, and let's go back to one of our favorite examples of a language. Let's just do the language of palindromes. Okay, so imagine that we have some tape like this. We have an input written on the tape like this, 110011, and we have these hash symbols to mark the start and end of the input. And now we would like to design a Turing machine that tells us whether this string is a palindrome or not. Okay, we already know that there's no finite automaton that's going to do this for us. We proved that, which means that there's our Turing, which tells us that our Turing machine cannot work by just scanning from left to right on the tape. It's going to have to do something a little more interesting than that. So it starts here, and now, can anyone just sort of describe to me in words how the Turing machine might work that would do this? Yes.
You take the first thing and you
Yep.
and you keep swapping it with the next character until you reaches the end. And you make sure they match, and then
Yep.
you swap it, and you come back and you swap the next one and make it match. And
Yep.
you keep doing that.
Yep. Okay, good. So excellent. So basically what we want to do is we want to read the symbol here. We want to store it in memory, in our finite memory, which we can do. Then we want to go all the way to the end. We want to check that this symbol matches, reject if it doesn't. And then we want to go back, and then we want to hit what? This symbol here, right? And then we want to check that this matches this. And then we want to go back to here, and then we want to check that this matches this. And then if everything matches, then we want to accept, right? So basically, we want to go back and forth and back and forth. We want to zigzag through. So it won't be very efficient. It'll take us a quadratic amount of time, in fact, just to check whether our string is a palindrome. But we're not worried about efficiency for now. Okay, so, but now there's a few technicalities that we have to deal with. One is, how do we know when we've reached this symbol? How do we know when we've reached the symbol that we want to be comparing against? Anyone? Yeah?
As you go, you can replace it with another special character.
Well, we don't want to be replacing all of these with special characters.
When you reach the end,
Yeah.
You read the special character, so you know you're at the end.
Yep.
As you move back,
Yes.
replace it with a new character.
Excellent. Yes, that's right. And and likewise, we're also going to need to know when we go this way, when we've reached the beginning, right? And so we're going to have to do a similar thing over here, right? We're going to have to go until we reach the hash character, and then we know that we've gotten to the last point, and then we're going to have to go back, and we're going to have to take the symbol that we want to compare and replace it with a hash character. All right, so let's be more explicit about it. Okay. So we have an initial state, Q0, let's say, right? And now we want to go, we want to go to one state or another depending on whether this symbol here is a 1 or a 0, right? So we can say, if the symbol is a 1, then first of all, overwrite it with a hash. We don't need it anymore, okay? And move 1 to the right, okay? Likewise, what should be over here? 0 hash are, right? If we've read a 0, then overwrite it and move to the right. Okay, now what transitions do I need in this state? Yeah.
If you read a 1 or a 0, don't write anything and move to the right.
Exactly, perfect. Yep, so I need, if you read a 1, then keep it a 1 and move to the right. If you read a 0, keep it a 0 and move to the right. Same thing down here. Okay, just some boring housekeeping work, just to say, get all the way over to the right. Okay, and then what? When do we stop this? When you reach a hash. When we reach this hash, then we know that we have to do something different. Okay, so when you read a hash, what should we do? We could, anyone? Yeah, keep it a hash and move to the left. Same thing over here. If you read a hash, keep it a hash and move to the left. Okay. Now we're ready to do. Now we're over here. Okay. Now what happens if we're up here and we read a 0? Reject. So I'm just going to say if we read a 0, then reject. Similarly, if we're down here and we read a 1, then reject. Okay? But what happens if we're up here and we read a 1? Replace it with what? With a hash and do what? Left, and go to the left. Yep. Okay, likewise. If you're down here and you read a 0, replace it with a hash and go to the left. Okay. All right, now what should we do over here? Well, if we read, basically we need to get all the way back over to the left, to the left end of the string now, right? So we can say, if we read a 0, keep it a 0 and move left. If we read a 1, keep it a 1 and move left. Same thing down here. If you read a 1, keep it a 1, move left. 0, keep it a 0 and move left. Okay, but then what happens if we read a hash? Yeah, if we read a hash, exactly. If we read a hash, then I can keep it a hash, move to the right, and go back to the start state. If I read a hash here, keep it a hash, go to the right, move back to the start state. All right, now there's just one thing missing from this Turing machine. Anyone know what's missing? Yeah.
So if it's an odd length string?
Okay, we can deal with that later, but that's a good point. If it's an odd length string, right? Even more basic, even if it's an even length string. Yeah.
Is there a way to halt it?
Yeah, never. Well, I mean, we do have it halt and reject over here, but we never ever have it halt and accept. So when can it accept?
It reads a hash and goes back, read a hash.
Yeah, exactly. If we so we can say if you were expecting a 0 or a 1 and you instead see a hash, that means that you're done. That means that you have successfully palindromed the string. Right? You have verified that it is a palindrome. Okay, so we can say if you read a hash here, then you accept. And likewise, 0, 1, if you read a hash here, then you can accept. And I think that will handle the odd length strings also. I'm pretty sure it will. Right? You can check that if you want. But I think that if we put the accept here, accept here, accept here, then we've handled palindromes of odd length and of even length. Is that right? Right, because the only way we're going to halt and reject is if you is if you find a non-matching pair, and otherwise you're going to you're still going to halt. So then you're going to halt and accept. Okay, so there's our first and pretty much our last Turing machine. Okay, so you can see, this is starting to look something like an assembly language program. right? Or like a computer. It reads symbols, it writes symbols, it moves around in memory. Okay, but now, all right, but now, we should come back a little bit, to, the question that, that I, wondered about as an 11-year-old or whatever, right? Which is, well, why not have a still more powerful model of computation, right? Maybe if you can jump around in memory, or if, maybe if you have more symbols available or something, then this would, that would make it more powerful, right? This is, why isn't this just like a souped up finite automaton that could be souped up even further if we wanted? Okay, so okay, so there's a sort of foundational, I guess hypothesis, in computer science that basically says that once we've gotten up to Turing machines, then we've already reached here the sort of the limit of of what we've now successfully captured what we mean by a computer. Okay, and that idea is called the Church-Turing thesis. Okay, now this is not a theorem. Okay, there's no proof of this. There's it's not even clear what it would mean to prove it. Okay, that's why it's called a thesis. Okay, but there are sort of two different things that you can mean by the Church-Turing thesis. Okay, the first is just that it's a matter of definition. Okay, that we are going to say we're going to define what we mean by computable. To be computable using one of these Turing machines like this. Okay. But the, and then it's kind of like, mathematician would say, look, the definition of a continuous function is, a function that satisfies this definition in terms of epsilons and deltas, right? And you might say, when you first see, in calculus, the definition with epsilons and deltas, you say, why does this really capture continuity, right? And, if a true mathematician would answer that, well, because we've defined it to. Right, but that's still, it's not really satisfying because, you had, before you ever took a calculus course, you had some idea of what it meant to draw a curve on the board without ever lifting the chalk, right? And then, you want to know why does the formal definition capture your informal intuition, and so then you can give arguments for that. Like you can show examples. You can say, here are examples of continuous curves that you would agree are continuous, like parabolas or lines or whatever. And here's why they satisfy the epsilon delta definition. Here's something that you would agree is discontinuous, and here's why it doesn't. Right, and then you can get to more confusing examples like sine of 1 over x or whatever, right? Or these or the function that's 0 at all the irrational numbers and 1 at the rational numbers, right? And then maybe your intuition doesn't render such a clear verdict on whether it's continuous or not, but there you just rely on the definition. Right, because the definition at least got right the cases that that you had an intuition for. Okay, so you can do something similar with computability, and this is more or less what Turing does in his paper. Okay, that he sort of argues that that this. This definition, of a Turing machine, he didn't call it that, by the way, but later people did, but that it captures our intuition of what we mean for something to be computable. Okay, a more interesting and more modern way of looking at it is that the Church-Turing thesis is actually a falsifiable scientific claim. It's a claim about the nature of the physical universe. Okay, it's saying that the laws of physics of our universe have the property that any computer that we can build, consistent with the laws of physics, will be simulatable using a Turing machine. Okay, now it's not, like any scientific hypothesis, that's that's not something that can be mathematically proved, right? It's it's something that could be falsified someday, right? There are even a few physicists like Roger Penrose who believe that it's false, who believe that he believes that the brain can somehow use quantum gravity effects that give it abilities beyond those of a Turing machine. Okay, that's a minority position, right? At least what we know, the physical theories that we know, like quantum mechanics, general relativity, quantum field theory, right? They all seem like they do have the property that we can simulate them using a Turing machine or using a digital computer, if you like, at least to any desired finite precision. Right, there is always this issue that the laws of physics involve continuous quantities, right? And with Turing machines, we've said that we have only a discrete alphabet of symbols, and we've sort of discretized space and time also, because we have these discrete tape squares, these discrete time steps. Okay, but we can at least sort of simulate all sorts, a physical system that we want to any sort of desired finite precision, right? And at least the laws of physics that we know about seem to satisfy this property. Okay, we'll see later that how it's possible to conceive of laws of physics that would let us do more than this, right? We'll see that there are things that not even Turing machines can do. And you could imagine laws of physics that would let us do those things. Okay, but for now, the Church-Turing thesis seems to be like a pretty good hypothesis about the nature of our world. Okay, so that was all kind of highfalutin, but the type, like the most straightforward kind of argument that you can give for the Church-Turing thesis, basically just to, you think it's false, then, okay, you say what you think a computer should be, so say what capabilities you think a computer should have, and then once you've specified it, then I'll show you that whatever you said can just be simulated by a Turing machine. So it's the same thing anyway. Right? And so people spent sort of 30 years or so convincing themselves of that. Right? And just, showing that all different models of computation that people could think of can be simulated using, this ordinary Turing machine. Okay, so let's just do, a couple examples of that, just to sort of show you, why it is that people came to believe this Church-Turing thesis. Okay. All right, so here's a first question that we could ask. Let's say that I actually restrict the power of a Turing machine by making the tape infinite, but only in one direction. Okay, so now the tape just has an end over here, right? You're just not allowed to go past here. If we have a special symbol, like there be dragons or something, okay? And this tells you that you've reached the edge of the world. You can't go any further, okay? So so you start here. You have an input that's written over here, okay? And now the question is, can you do everything using this kind of Turing machine that you could do using a two-way infinite Turing machine? Could anyone give me a suggestion for how we might do it? So again, what we want in this sort of case is we want a simulation, right? We want a general way of taking a two-way infinite Turing machine and simulating it using a one-way infinite Turing machine. Yeah.
You could map all the squares from our previous example then it's to squares on that one.
Yeah.
And then maybe do some stuff or something with the states to make it work, right?
Yeah, more or less. So, okay. So what we can do, is let's just insert a boundary over here, right? And let's say we've got our two-way infinite tape, like this. And now what we could do is, okay, I want to simulate this by a one-way infinite tape. So I could just sort of interleave things, right? I could say here, let me, for clarity, let me call the things on this side A's and B's. So this will be B, A, B, B. And then I'll say I'll just interleave them. So I'll have like going left here, so I'll have B, then 1, then B, then 0, then A, then 0, then B, then 1. Right, where I just, I'm just zigzagging like that. Okay, and now what I can do, right, again, a key point for all these simulations is that time is not an issue, right? We're not worried about how inefficient it is. Okay, so now what happens is that when I'm going to simulate this Turing machine, except that, instead of taking a step, I have to take 2 steps, right? Like if I want to go, if I know that I'm on the left side of the tape, so I'm on the B and A part, and I want to go and then if in the original machine I wanted to go 1 square to the left, then here I have to go 2 squares to the right, right? Likewise, if I wanted to go 1 square to the right, then here I go 2 squares to the left. Okay? And if I'm on the right side, then I go 1 square to the right by going 2 squares to the right. I go 1 square to the left by going 2 squares to the left. Fine. Okay, and then I need some logic for what happens when I cross the boundary, right? So if I'm like at B and I cross the boundary to 1, well, then I can model that by just going 1 square to the right. Right, so now I switch over, and if I'm over here and I go 1 square to the left, then I can model that here by going 1 square to the left. All right, so I switch over. Okay, so then this sort of argument shows that two-way infinite tapes, are equivalent to one-way infinite tapes. And yeah, I had to expand the alphabet by a little bit, but the alphabet is still finite, right? So this is not that big a deal. Another thing that you can verify, maybe will be on a PSET is that if you don't like the fact that the alphabet is larger, well, you can reduce the alphabet, and that's not going to change the power either. You can have a smaller alphabet. Okay, now a slightly more interesting thing. Let's say, we could also imagine a 2-tape Turing machine. So what this means, and in fact this is just often very convenient if we're talking about Turing machines, is that we have this one tape head, and we have these, but now well, it's got 2 tapes, okay, and so it's got a location on tape 1 and a location on tape 2. And it's allowed, it can read the symbol in here, read the symbol in here. Based on both of these symbols, now it can transition to a new state. It can decide how to overwrite this symbol and how to overwrite this symbol. And then it can make 4 decisions about how to move, right? It can go left or right on this tape, and it can also move left or right on this tape. Okay? Now, let's say that we want to simulate a 2-tape Turing machine using a 1-tape Turing machine. How would we do that? Yeah.
Well, maybe for every combination of symbols, we'd create a new symbol,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'd turn each tape into a half tape,
Uh-huh.
and then we could combine them
Yep.
to represent both tapes.
Okay, so the first thing that we can do is we can make both of these tapes one-way infinite tapes, right? Because we can just use the type of simulation that we saw here to do that, right? Let me just make both of these one-way infinite tapes by just doing this splicing trick from before, right? And I can do that with 2 tapes just as easily as I can do it with 1 tape. Okay, next, it's almost like we're talking about DNA, right? All right, in fact, there are, very, very deep analogies between Turing machines and DNA, right? Now I'm just going to splice these 2 guys together, okay? I'm just going to, attach the, this end to this end, and now I've got a single one-way infinite tape. But there's still an issue that I have to worry about. Can anyone see what the issue is? Well, in the original two-way, in the original 2-tape Turing machine, right, I had 2 pointers to memory at the same time. I had a pointer over here, and I had a pointer over here. Okay. And now, now that I have only a single tape, Turing machine, now I need only a single pointer. So how can I deal with that? Anyone? All right. Well, the short answer to that question is with a lot of shuttling back and forth. Okay. So what I can do is I can have a special symbol that, to just remember where I was. Okay, or in fact, I can just enlarge my alphabet. And for each old symbol, like if I had 0, 1, hash, now I'll have a symbol that says 0 and remember that you were there, 1 and remember that you were there, hash and remember that you were there. All right, so I enlarge my alphabet like that. Okay, and then and now I need to shuttle back and forth. So I need to say, if okay, I was reading a 1 over here. I need to remember that in my finite state. Go over to over here. Stop when I find one of these symbols that tells me where I was, right? And then I know both the symbol that I was reading on the one half of the tape, and I know that the symbol that I'm reading on the new half. So now I know, where I should move over here. Okay, but now I got to shuttle all the way back over here, and now I need to figure out, now because now I know where to move over here, right? Whether to move left or right. So I go and do that, and then, for each step, for every single step of my original 2-tape Turing machine, I now have to do the shuttling back and forth, I think, a few times actually, in order to simulate it on this 1-tape Turing machine. Okay, so this is actually, at least a quadratically inefficient simulation, right? Because like for every 1 step of the old machine, I'm doing n steps going back and forth and back and forth. Okay, but I can do it, I can. There's no reason why not. Okay, so now this is kind of convenient because just like we can have a 2-tape Turing machine, we can have a 3-tape or a 4-tape Turing machine, and so forth. It's not hard to see that these are also equivalent to 1-tape Turing machines. Okay, so, and then we can also have as many tapes as we want that are just for scratch space. So the picture to have in mind is that we have some input tape, on which some input is written, so call it X. So in this case, X is a string of n bits, okay? And then we have a Turing machine, call it M, which is reading, and And M could also have additional tapes with additional inputs on them. Like here, I'll have a tape with another input, Y. Okay. Okay, and now, given these tapes, the Turing machine will do something, right? Namely, it will either accept, reject, or run forever. Okay, and whatever it does, I'll call that like M of, the inputs. So, the behavior of M on these inputs is, accept, reject, or loop. Okay. Okay, and so now, if we have a language L, right, so we have a set of strings, okay, over some alphabet, here I'm just taking it to be 0, 1, okay, then we'll call the language computable if there exists a Turing machine, M, such that I'll say M of x accepts, or M of x equals accept for all inputs x that are in the language, and M of x equals reject for all x that's not in the language. Okay, so language is computable if there's some Turing machine that computes it, right? And that means two things, right? First of all, the Turing machine has to halt for every possible input. Okay, that's already, not all Turing machines are going to do that. Okay, but second of all, not only does it have to halt, it has to accept if x is in the language, and it has to reject whenever x is not in the language. Okay, and now, the next step would just be to see, what are some examples of languages that are computable. Right? We already saw one example. What was it? The palindromes, right? But in fact, at this point, it's just, it's just programming. Okay, at this point, I could say, the language of all of 1 to n for all n such that n is prime. Okay. It turns out that that's computable as well. I'm not going to force you to draw the Turing machine that does it, okay? But there is one, And if you really wanted to do it, then the way to do it would be in your favorite programming language, like whether it's Java or Haskell or Python or whatever. Write a primality testing program, then compile that program, to assembly, and then compile the assembly into Turing machine. Okay, you can do it. You'll get a Turing machine with this big, buttload of states. Okay, but it'll work. And you can have a Turing machine for running Windows or for running Linux. Okay, or for playing your favorite video game. Okay, so at this point we've sort of crossed a threshold. And there's one particular thing Turing machines can do that's especially interesting and important, and which Turing noted in his original paper, which is that they can simulate other Turing machines. Okay, so we'll see that on Thursday, and then we'll also see what Turing machines cannot do, and then we'll talk about different levels of infinity, about Cantor. We'll talk about Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Okay.